everyone, and welcome to Live Free Legal. I am Tiffany Lesnik, domestic violence attorney, survivor, and founder. Today's episode is an incredibly important one, especially for those of you living in small town communities who feel nervous about filing for a protective order or stepping into a family courtroom where everyone seems to know everyone. We often hear survivors worry about back chamber deals, biases, or not being believed in smaller communities. But change is happening, and one of the leaders of that change is here with us today. I'm honored to welcome District Court Judge Beth Tanner from Moore and Hoke County, North Carolina. Judge Tanner is not only presiding over some of the most sensitive cases involving families and domestic violence, but she's also breaking new ground. She is the first judge to teach at the Domestic Violence Task Force training, which marks a huge step forward in growing involvement for trauma-informed judiciary education, something we discussed recently with Judge Ashley Parker in Wake County. Judges like Parker and Tanner are helping to reshape the courtroom experience, ensuring survivors are seen, heard, and safe. So, Judge Tanner, thank you so much for being with us today and for your courage to educate from the bench. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So I am a district court judge here in Moore and Hoke counties. Unlike some of our larger areas and smaller areas, most of your judges are going to cover multiple different counties. And my counties, even though they're both smaller counties than like Wake County, they are very different in how they are. I'm a mom. I have two girls. My oldest child is at UNC Wilmington, and my youngest daughter is in high school. I definitely am experienced in trauma myself, having had a close family member that experienced some personal trauma. So it caused me to learn quite a bit about it. My husband is a family law attorney, so we talk a whole lot about domestic issues at our house.
Okay. So you're attorney as well, correct?
Yes, all judges
Okay.
have to be, so all of your district court judges have to be attorneys.
Okay. So just a family filled with attorneys.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. And just to give us some perspective, like Hoke County and Moore County, what is the size in relation to maybe some of the larger metropolitan counties in this area?
So I don't know the exact population of both counties, but Hoke County is much smaller than Moore County. Moore County is where Pinehurst is, and that's what I tell most people. It's where people go to play golf. And so it is a community of a lot of retirees, but then we have a number of other townships that look very much like normal rural kind of townships. Moore County is small enough that we still do not qualify to have more than just our one hospital system. So if you guys know anything about that, we are still under the threshold so that other hospital systems like Duke or UNC can't come in. Hoke County is quite a bit different. Both Hoke and Moore County have a large military population because we are very close to Fort Bragg. Hoke County is the closest county to Fort Bragg, and it is the fastest growing military population outside of a county with a base in it. Fort Bragg touches right on the edge of Hoke County, and we have a ton of military members that have moved in. Outside of that, sort of the only township in Hoke County is Rayford. It's very, very small in that way. It's very different from Moore County in that it has kind of a higher military population and it's much smaller overall.
Okay. And for a lot of the women that I work with, there's a lot of fear about prosecuting a protective order or a custody case in a smaller county where everybody seems to know everyone. The attorneys know all the attorneys know the judges, and it might be that even the community, everybody knows everyone. Are there some misconceptions about filing for a protective order or the administration of justice in a small county?
Yes. So I think there are some realities of the fact that you do know everybody in a small town. I mean, I think that's true. However, what I will say is as we progress in time, a good example is myself, and then I've had three other judges come in after me. As we're younger judges come in, that sort of, I would call it an old boys network, just isn't as prevalent. And that's true anywhere. I think most places in North Carolina are experiencing growth because North Carolina is a popular place to come live. And so I do think that's true. That while we may know everybody, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to push a case their way or have an opinion one way or the other. I would tell people that every judge is still responsible for listening to the facts of the case and determining that they have their own ethical obligations that we're held to. And so, even though we may see someone we know outside of the courtroom, that doesn't mean that I'll give them a favor inside the courtroom by any means whatsoever. I can see that concern, I can see that misconception, but it doesn't ring true in my experience when we actually handle cases.
What do you do as a judge in a small town to ensure fairness, right? If you do know someone in the community and they're in front of you as a party.
So if you have a actual personal relationship with someone, we do not hear their case. And that does mean we'll bring in visiting judges from other counties. So that will actually be a little bit more of a frequent occurrence, maybe, than in some of your larger places like Wake County. It is not uncommon. I'll give a great example to have a court staff going through a divorce, and not a single judge is going to hear that case that is elected here in this community. We're going
Mhm.
to get a judge from a community, usually not even that touches our community, that's kind of from far away, to come in and hear that case. Many times in situations like that, where it is going to be a court staff or someone who's well known, like an elected official, the chief district court judge will actually sort of head that off at the pass before we even have to handle it ourselves as individual judges. So a lot of times our courthouse leadership, so our chief district court judge, our senior, will sort of recognize that as an issue and go ahead and make those arrangements. We do not choose those judges, so people should know that. The administrative office of the courts down in Raleigh picks the judge
Right.
that's coming. So we're not handpicking a judge from another place. That is picked for us by somebody else.
Is that something that a victim, if they feel uncomfortable with their abuser or the opposing party, they feel like that person knows the judge intimately or their family is well connected with the judge, can they ask for a judge to recuse themselves or appoint a different judge? Or is that a bad look or a bad move?
So I do not ever think that's a bad look or a bad move. I can't speak for every judge. I can only speak for myself. I can speak for the practice that I have here and the colleagues that I have here. I don't know a single judge that would be offended by a recusal request. You can certainly make that motion. That motion is a right to you. The other thing that will happen in family court cases, it will not happen in domestic violence cases, but in family court cases, even in small communities, we have the family court coordinator. So we have the one judge, one family system. So when you file a family court case, you will be assigned a court coordinator who's a staff member. They're just a staff member that works with the judge to schedule everything. That's a good time to say, I have a concern that the opposing party has an intimate relationship with this judge. That court coordinator is going to communicate with that judge on that, and so they can make it certainly happens. I mean, I'm not going to tell you it doesn't happen that I haven't walked out in a courtroom and seen somebody out there and gone, I know that person. They go to my church and I'm in Bible study with them. Not like they go to my church and I saw them across the pew every day and I wouldn't know them from Adam, but like they're in my Bible study. And I have to say, I'm very sorry, I can't hear this case.
Right.
They're on track with my child. That certainly happens. However, no judge that I've ever known would be offended at this point by a request for a recusal. They may deny it, but they have a responsibility to examine that and will usually explain to you why.
What constitutes enough of a personal relationship that would make you recuse yourself? Because I think there's a misconception about my ex was a law enforcement officer and he knows the court system or he knows the judges, but maybe you've seen him in passing or you know him from being subpoenaed and testifying in court, but maybe you don't really have a personal relationship. What constitutes enough of a relationship for you to say, I feel like I need to recuse myself from hearing this case?
So the law literally is that each judge is supposed to examine themselves for bias, and they are to determine whether or not in managing this case they would have bias for or against a party or even a particular result. For me, a great example is my youngest child is in a private school community. I do not know the people in elementary school. My daughter is in high school. You know what I mean? I don't know those people at all. She is years away from any of those elementary school children. Now, my daughter's high school class, on the other hand, is 20 children. If I had a case with parents of a child that was in my daughter's freshman class, I would recuse myself from that, even if I didn't personally know them, because we're going to see each other all the time. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, we're going to be there all the time.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, we're going to be there all the time.
Hmm.
However, Parents in the elementary school that I don't know, even if I were to see them in passing on the school grounds, that would not be, in my mind, a bias. I wouldn't have any bias. Same thing for law enforcement officers. If a law enforcement officer is someone, let's say I've been in criminal court with them and they're the only highway patrolman that ever testifies in my criminal courtroom, I would probably get a different judge to hear that case.
What if, like you said, there's an old boys network? There's one judge, like there's one sitting judge, extremely small community county, and that judge refuses to have a new judge come in or recuse themselves, and there is a really unfavorable outcome for a victim. What options are available to her?
So, all judges are responsible to follow the canons. We answer, just like lawyers answer to the state bar, we answer to judicial standards, which is an independent body that's going to look over the ethical decisions that we've made. In addition to that, you can appeal your cases. I know that can be challenging and expensive for folks. You can appeal your cases. What I would say to folks is I'm not even aware of any county right now where only one judge sits in it. I'm really not. Most counties that are that small are in a multi-county district with multiple judges at this point, at least in North Carolina. So it would be rare. You may have a judge that refuses to recuse themselves. I would take that the way I would take any other decision, that that judge has examined it and has moved forward. I know it's easy for me to say right on this side of the bench, but it's kind of like if they didn't rule your way on a legal objection, that's the way that they kind of ruled and moved forward from that. I think sometimes it can be enticing maybe to see everything through the lens of negative to you. Sometimes those are just decisions that didn't go your way, if that makes sense. So I do
Right,
think
right.
that part is important. I will tell you this, as far as for victims and folks to understand, is I was just looking at the numbers the other day, and we have 5 district court judges here. We have 2 women out of our 5, and our Superior Court bench is, we do not have any women on the Superior Court bench at this time. We did for a period of time, and now we don't. I think in Wake County, I think the numbers are literally like
The
invert.
opposite.
Yeah, I think there are more women on the bench than men, or at least an even number. I didn't look to count that. I wouldn't let that concern folks. So what I say to people is one of our judges, his wife is an attorney. She does family law too, which is kind of funny. So I think just knowing that and understanding that. So even on our bench, though we do have like 2 women, we have a diversity of cultures actually, which is very interesting. And so you are likely to, even in our small area, sort of get some different perspectives on the bench. I hope that
Mhm.
answers that question.
Yeah, and I had talked to Judge Parker in a previous session about not getting, we're going to talk about elections and getting
Yep.
trauma-informed judges on the bench in part 2. So this is part 1 of a part 2 series that we're going to have, and we'll talk more about trauma-informed judges in the next section. But does it really matter about a person's party platform when they're running for district court judge, or the importance of diversity or having more women on the bench? Do you think party platform matters? And do you think it helps victims of domestic violence to have more women on the bench?
So I definitely think having a diversity of options on the bench is helpful. I think that's true in any workplace. There's no denying that that's true in any workplace. And that's because we are, as people, we all bring biases and experiences to our life. I say that bias isn't a bad word, it's a word you need to be aware of. So you just need to know that. So, for example, I've only raised daughters. I have no experience raising sons myself. I have
Mm-hmm.
plenty of cases where I'm dealing with children that are boys, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I have colleagues who are raising boys, and that's helpful because it's helpful for me to be able to come back and have conversations about that. I've never been divorced, but I have colleagues that have gone through divorce. So I think it is important to have not only a diversity of male or female or cultural backgrounds, but also just a diversity of experiences.
Right.
One of the things that does more frequently happen, I think, in smaller towns is to think about a diversity of legal experience being on the bench. Many times, private practice attorneys don't jump from private practice into being on the bench. So we frequently have a number of people that have been in the district attorney's office. It's the next largest state employer for lawyers in a small town. You might get some folks from the county attorney's office to come in. So when you're living in a small town, I think it is important to think about who is on your ballot as judge. This is what I say to people all the time. Nobody cares about their judges. They don't until they're standing in a courtroom. And then they're
Right.
like, oh, whoa, how do we pick these? Well, you pick them every 4 years in
Yeah.
district court. And I'm running right now. So one of my favorite things to say is you are never going to start a case down at the North Carolina Supreme Court. You're going to learn a lot about Supreme Court justices in the coming up election cycle, right? You're going to hear a ton of them. They all have money to tell you a lot about themselves. The judge you're going to see is the district court judge. That's who you're going to see most of the time. You're not even probably going to see your Superior Court judge very much. So
Mhm.
you're going to see your district court judge. And for domestic violence and family court matters, that's all you're going to see.
Right.
And so it really does matter to know who those judges are as best as you can get educated about them. We are identified with parties, so there's no sort of beating around that bush. My belief is that it matters that you understand what the judge's philosophy is that can be informed by their party politics. I would consider myself to be conservative, and what I would say about that is I believe in following the law as it is written. What that looks like in family court, for example, is if a statute says something and that statute is constitutional, I'm going to follow it. The facts and the law just kind of flow that way. It's not really a hard formula. I don't believe in sort of reading into the law in any way. That's an important judicial philosophy for people to understand. We're going to talk about talking to a task force for 50B, domestic violence. There are very particular requirements to qualify for domestic violence. You have to have a particular kind of personal relationship. If you don't fit in that personal relationship, you can't get that protection. So I think it's important to understand your judge's judicial philosophy and what they're willing to think about. The
Right.
other thing I think with judges are you won't know if somebody's never been a judge before, but if somebody's a judge, you can talk to people. A lot
Right.
of people have been in family court with judges, and they'll be able to tell you this is sort of how Judge Tanner handles these types of things, and this is sort of how she handled my case in this way. The best interest of the minor child is up to each individual judge. And so the best way to learn about how a judge handles that if you're thinking about an election is to talk to people who've been in front of them and kind of see what is it they're looking at. So I'll give you another example. I'm going to ask more questions probably than anybody. I ask a ton of questions in child custody cases because I can. And I think that it's important that I know I've overturned every single rock that I think I need to overturn to understand the best interest. So my other colleagues don't ask a single question. So it's just a difference in philosophy. That's not a right or wrong. It's just different.
I tell the people that I work with to get on Facebook because there's so many Facebook groups out there, like
Yes.
single moms of your county, or try to find local groups because they are talking, right? They're talking about who the good attorneys are, what the judges are doing. Like you can get so much information just getting online through social media about what's going on in your local jurisdiction. Just the tip for that. And you said at the beginning of our webcast that both you and your husband are attorneys, and I know your husband practices in one of the larger metropolitan areas. What do you think is like the biggest difference between the smaller town courthouses, courtrooms, and then the larger metropolitan areas? How do the courts function differently?
One of the biggest differences is probably in a smaller area, you're more likely to have your case heard faster. We just don't have the volume. I'll give you an example. My family court caseload runs about 85 cases active all the time. In Wake County, those caseloads are hundreds of cases all
Mhm.
the time. You are likely to get a temporary hearing within a couple of months with
Mm.
me. That's likely to happen. So I think that's probably the number one difference is that you're just more likely to get your case heard faster in a smaller area because we just don't have the same volume. I actually think courthouses, it doesn't matter if they're big or small, if you do not have an attorney, this is what I tell people. It's a little bit like everybody there knows the rules except you. That's how it probably feels. And I think about that. I just recently had back surgery, and my surgeon was very, very smart guy. And he would say things to me, and I would say to him, I'm not a back surgeon. You are going to have to explain that to me in a different way. And it reminded me a lot of being a judge on the bench is that we do that job every single day, 120 times a day, right? If I have a domestic violence court docket, I've got 30 cases on my docket, right? So that day alone, I'm going to go through the same type of trial 30 times. But for every 30 of those cases, 2 people per case, it is new to them. So I try to remember as a judge that we have to remember that for them it's new and they don't know it. Having said that, the way it feels is that everybody in there knows the steps to that dance and maybe you don't. So I would tell people coming in, just give yourself a little bit of grace and don't be afraid to ask a question. Do not be afraid of that. Judge, could you explain the procedure to me? I try to explain the procedure at the beginning of every case, and we'll talk about being trauma informed, but also be ready to ask those questions. I will add another way to learn about court is to go sit in court.
Right.
I know you probably tell your folks that, but courts are open, even family court. A judge might ask you, who are you? Like, oh,
Right.
are you here for this case or whatever? And that's okay. Just tell them I'm here to watch court because I have a case coming up or whatever. But I think that's a good way to see sort of how the process works.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And can they get help from like the clerk of court if they just go into the main office? Is that a good starting point for someone maybe representing themselves?
Yes, there are some small counties that may not have these resources, but for domestic violence, we all have like a friend to friend or domestic violence support. The clerk's office will have a list of those places that you can go to. We do have legal aid that helps here. And in fact, our family law clinics at our law schools are willing to come down and help in family court cases. But yes, if you have questions about that, go to the clerk's office and you kind of start there. I will caution folks that clerks cannot give legal advice.
Right.
So sometimes people will be asking questions and the clerk will say, I can't answer that. They're not being rude. They just really cannot tell you how to do that.
So just a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up this segment.
Sure.
I have had an experience in very small counties where they don't seem to have as many resources and they only schedule domestic court maybe 1 or 2 days a month. So they cram all of their cases into 1 or 2 days per month, which has meant for my clients like inaccess to justice because we can never get our case heard because they're trying to cram 100 cases into one day and it's impossible. So we just get continued and continued and continued. Do you have any tips or advice for a very, very small county like that where you just can't seem to get reached and there's no way you're going to reach a consent agreement or you're going to reach an agreement with the other side on getting heard?
A couple things. Number one, all counties now, if they're listening to the Chief Justice, are moving to one judge, one family, which means that we should be in what is called a family court model, which means we should be giving more than a couple of days a month. That may not be true everywhere, but it should be that way. If you have a repeated issue with getting scheduled, I would tell people never be afraid to object to a continuance. And as a judge sitting on the bench, I'm not a big fan of continuances. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that myself. For that very reason, what you're talking about, I'm not a big fan of it. I'm very detailed in my scheduling. That's about being trauma informed. I'm very particular about my scheduling. And when we pick a trial date, we have picked that trial date. Like we are going to try that case, except for tornadoes or hurricanes
Right.
or death in the family. We're ready to try the case. Having said that, though, I do know that other times you can get continue to continue. So don't be afraid to object to it. And when you object to it, it can be helpful to tell the judge how many times it has been continued. Not just say, hey, it's just been continued so much, but to say this case was filed on this date. It has been continued this number of times. Or if we're one judge, one family district, there are numbers that are given out that are like, how's your caseload going? I mean, I like to see that my numbers are good and they are keeping up with that. The other advice I would give you is every judge is subject to scheduling by the chief district court judge. We are all independent elected officials, so the chief has this odd job of trying to manage a bunch of people that are independently elected, right? He can't fire us. But if I was having a real problem with scheduling, I would find out who the chief was in that district. And I would ask, you'll have to have that conversation with the other counsel, you know, whatever that case may be. Make sure you're not having ex parte communications. But I would lodge that complaint and writing to them. I do not know a single chief who would just ignore that concern that a case just is not being moved repeatedly. I don't know about your particular experience in your county, but I will tell you that my chief would be in my office, like, what is going on here?
Right.
So that's a way to kind of go and say, I'm really having a hard time getting this scheduled. How can we get it scheduled? Because the chief can give you a special setting for that.
Right.
That's another thing I'll add is the chief can give this authority to judges to set a matter preempt, even in family court, depending on the type of matter it is. And so it may be helpful to include him in that conversation, him or her, whoever the chief is, to say, this has been continued 10 times. We've got to have answers for our family.
What would you say? And I'm sure you've had cases where the parties just kind of get under your skin, they get on your nerves. So, for that judge that keeps continuing your case over and over again and makes it very clear that if you force this to be heard in their courtroom, it's not going to go well for you. Do you have a recommendation for something that you could say or do that maybe would help find more favor with the court in that scenario when you are pushing a hearing and you know the judge may take it out on you?
So that shouldn't happen. I know it may happen, but it shouldn't happen. And I have heard those stories. Like I have heard the stories of the judge saying, if you come try this, you may not like the result.
And I know I put you on the spot, but maybe
I
you've
think,
had a situation where someone was really just like, this case, it's on my docket, but maybe somebody said something or done something and then it like kind of softened your heart. I don't know if you have a story like that.
yeah, I don't know if I've had a story like that. I think what I would say is I have been on the other side of litigation. So I've been in the courtroom as a litigant when I needed help and when my close family member needed help. And so, yes, judges are people too. So judges are people too. And sometimes they make bad decisions and say things that aren't nice and lose their temper and do all the things that we do as human beings. I would say remain respectful to any judge, always remain respectful. But I don't ever believe that means that you can't argue a good argument. My belief is that we have a job because people need their matters resolved. I want to encourage people that every judge, you may have that experience. There is another judge that's like me. I have a belief that if somebody has brought me their broken pieces, because court is scary, court is scary. And what you're doing is you're taking your most intimate problems, especially in family court and in domestic violence, and you are going to a person you don't know, in theory, right? You might have seen him at the grocery store, but you don't know this person, this judge, in front of an audience of people you don't know. And you're bringing them all of your broken parts because you can't figure out how to put it back together. And my personal belief is that nobody does that if they can otherwise figure it out. And
Mm-hmm,
so
right.
that's just the truth. Nobody wants to do that. So at least for me, are there cases that I think to myself, I just wish we could get along here, whatever? Sure, there are absolute cases about that. But the reality still is they've come to you for help. So my advice would be continue to remain respectful, but I don't believe that means you have to just tolerate it. I don't know that there's anything that you can say except maybe to remind the court, I'm here because I don't know where else to go, and I just need your help in helping me put this back together.
That's good advice. I mean, that's the best that we can do, right? Just to
Yeah.
remain kind, polite, respectful, organized, and then move forward from there. So that's good advice. Last question, and then we'll wrap up for this segment. Do you find are smaller county courts likely to appoint like third parties, parenting coordinators, GALs? Are they more likely to order psychological evaluations, custody evaluations, or less likely than maybe larger counties would be?
Less, I would say less. Using parenting coordinators was not done a lot. When I came on the bench, that was something new that we started doing. And I was familiar with that practice, and I do think it's a good practice in certain cases. Some of the reality of that is money. You know, you don't have as many litigants with as much money to afford those types of evaluations. Resources are different in smaller communities. We have a lot of resources that are faith-based resources that are not what you would think of as your traditional, I'm going to go down and get health and human services or this kind of thing, resource or nonprofits. We have a lot of more faith-based resources, but we do have resources for people to rely on. As far as information, though, what's important to know about that is what that means is the court is receiving information primarily from the parties. So if you think about a case where there might be a psychological evaluation or a parenting coordinator or a GAL that's involved, the court is getting information not just from the two parties, but also from all these third parties that are out
Right.
there. In
Hmm.
a smaller community where the families just don't have as much money to afford those types of interventions, the court is really relying on the evidence that's coming in through the parties. So it becomes important to make sure you're bringing your evidence and you're bringing witnesses that you need to talk about your parenting. Every party can ask for that. So a party can ask, I think we need a psychological evaluation here. I think we need a parenting coordinator. But ultimately, I do think we just use those less. And I think there's good and bad to that. I think sometimes there's way too many voices in a room. I sometimes look at those, and that's not a criticism, but I look at some cases that are in bigger areas and they got like 10 people involved in them, right? They've got
Right.
all this stuff. And I sometimes think if we stripped all this away and we just talked to the parents to figure out what was going on, what would happen here, and we just really heard what those parents were saying or what those people were saying. I sometimes think that information is helpful and wish I had more of it, but truthfully, it kind of cuts both ways.
This information has been so helpful. I know so many of our viewers have so many questions about court and small town communities, they have so much anxiety, so much fear about it. So I think this conversation has been really helpful in sharing insight and to what small town community court is like. And I just thank you for sharing your insight and your leadership on the bench here with us in rural communities and counties where survivors often feel unseen and unheard. Where can our viewers go to find out more about
I
you?
have a website, and so you can learn more about me at bethtannerforjudge.com. I do have an active social media, so you can definitely go onto Facebook or Instagram. I even have a Twitter page, which I don't like as much, but you can see kind of what I do. I try to put out there what I'm doing in the community all the time. The one thing I will end by saying is I also moved from a large area to a smaller town. And what I would tell anybody that's doing the same is never be afraid to take up space. You're just as much entitled to be in that space seeking redress inside that courtroom as anybody else. As long as you're respectful and nice, you should never be afraid to kind of take up space. I had that conversation with my mother the other day. I think that may be something as women we have to remind ourselves that it's okay that we go take up space and ask for our needs to be met. That's true in a big city, but it's true in a small town too. So don't be afraid to go into court and ask for your needs to be met in a polite and respectful way, for sure.
Right, that's awesome. Okay, so they can find out more about you at
Yes.
bethtannerforjudge.com.
Yes.
You said you are running for election this cycle.
Yep. So I'll be up for re-election in 2026. So,
The primary is in March of 2026.
yep.
Okay. So go find out more about Beth at her website, bethtannerforjudge.com. We need to support more trauma informed judges and make sure that we're electing them and getting them on the bench because that is how we make real change through the judicial system. Join us next week. We're going to continue this conversation in part 2, where we'll explore how trauma informed training for judges like the program that Beth is leading is transforming the way domestic violence cases are handled in the courtroom in the United States and even around the world. Because things are changing, things are happening. And so there is hope for the family court system. If you're ready to dive deeper and need more help improving the legal outcome of your case, like us, give us a thumbs up and join our Empower Her private membership for legal resources and templates and legal support at www.livefreelegal.com. Judge Tanner, thank you so much for joining us today. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And to our viewers, I hope this conversation reminds you that change is happening even in the smallest towns. Judges like Judge Tanner are leading the way toward a more compassionate, informed, and fair court system for survivors of abuse. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and November is Family Court Awareness Month. Two powerful reminders that your story matters and that justice begins with truth and preparation. We will see you next time on part 2.